Reactor online, sensors online, weapons online, all systems nominal.
Hello and welcome to today's Battle Mech presentation. Today we're going to go over one of the favorite light mech that I've seen. A lot of people really like this little light mech. And okay, yes, I found every picture I found for this first intro. They all look to the left. It's just a weird coincidence on all of those geners, all of which are also Kuritan from the looks of it. It's an odd situation. Well, that part not really, since it is Kurita's Raider Light to compensate for some of their other units that they have, which are a little bit slower. So let's get into it. In order to talk about the genre, we do need to talk about a Draconis Combine Mustard Soldieries, which is Kurita's military arm. Their doctrine and a lot of how they operate has been set in stone since the early days of the Succession War, and I would say probably before as well. They already had a lot of very strict rules in the past, but once you start looking at what they've done with light mechs, well, they basically have formations built around two different machines. The Light Trooper, which is the Panther, we have it on top there, and the Raider, which is the Jenner. You'd literally see lances with two Panthers, two Jenners. That's probably one of the most common DCMS combat lance here. But those mechs can also serve as heavier support for other light elements like the Locust, the Wasp, and Stinger. You might see the odd commando here and there that they've stolen from Aus Steiner, but it's not a common mech in the DCMS. They also have spiders, which they can use as a heavy scout in a way. There's a variety of other mechs floating around, especially in more recent time. But an actual formation of Kurita mech at the light level, you're going to see Panthers and you're going to see Jenners, both of which have basically opposite roles. The Jenner really started its life at the tail end of the Star League era as the old gimmick was falling apart thanks to Stefan Emaris, and each successor was trying to figure out how they would be the next First Lord. While heavy and assault mechs were always in demand, a lot of military advisors saw the writing on the wall and started plotting out light mechs to be used as standard battle units for the years to come. When we get to the tail end of the Third Succession War and the start of the Fourth Succession War, you're literally having light mechs fight light mechs, and the heavy mechs are actually the gods of the battlefield while assaults are almost forgotten. It's a very weird situation, especially if you look nowadays where things have evened out once again. Diplin Mech Yards laid out the original plan for the Jenner in 2770 or so, and in 2779 they released their first model, the JR-7A Jenner, which was named after some Middle Ages Terran Olympian of some renown who had a bit of a mental breakdown. It's a weird situation overall, but I'd rather not get into that. Your first Jenner was a departure from the models we generally know in terms of the weaponry, but the base specifications were already there, and that's what they built on. The engine was a Magna 245. It's an uncommon engine, mainly used in Jenners, I would say. But Magna is a pretty decent company, and they've been around for a long time, making decent drivetrain and engines for all sorts of people. You also have 5 jump jets, giving you a jump range of about 150 meters. It's not the maximum you could get using that Magna 245, but it's what was decided when they made the machine. To protect it, you've got 4 tons of standard compound, which is not a lot on a 35-ton mech, but it's supposed to use its speed in order to avoid danger. The very first Jenner was armed with a single Diplin HD large laser, which was in a weird turret-like mount that didn't quite work. It was a bit of a directional mount. There's not enough 7As around to know how it really worked, and it was basically scrapped as soon as the old turret assembly started falling apart, which led to the next model. So that didn't quite work out. So Diplin went back to the drawing board and went with the JR-7F, or Fire Jenner, as some people call it. which was a departure from that base model. Each arm now mounted a pair of medium lasers, which were kept somewhat cool by 10 heat sinks. What you add, though, was 7 tons of standard compound, which makes it a very well-armored 35-ton mech that was actually quite quick. This is really a fantastic raider and brawler, and Flanagans used to have tons of those come in. Basically, they were the regular Jenner that we're going to talk about right after, where people actually stripped that SRM off and put more armor in. Since the base design did exist already, and there were already some calibrations existing for it, it was an easy modification to make and fairly popular amongst mercenaries. But the brave Mechwarrior samurai of Kurita thought it didn't have enough punch. So Diplan went back to the drawing board once again and removed 3 tons of armor to put in a 4-tube SRM launcher. This made the GR7D the standard Jenner that was used and produced in massive amounts by Kurita. All funds aside, between 2823 and 2848, about 1,350 Jenner walked out of Deepland's factory a year, not counting what they were building anywhere else or spare parts they were building somewhere else and bringing in to assemble. This was all meant to rearm and reinforce the DCMS. This really only ended when Deepland had a bit of a nuclear accident during the Succession War, because that's just how people solved issues back then. What you had from that point on was basically various companies building spare parts, building repair kits for existing Jenners, and a lot of them were kept running as long as possible or even longer than they probably should. There was no new Jenners coming on the market, however, until Theodore Kurita made it a top priority to restore production of the machine. They got a lot of help from our good friends at Comstar, because they were super generous and always willing to help, and they built a new production line for them on Lucian in 3046. Really, the people at Lucian Armor Work were basically like, yeah, we don't want to mess with the model too much. They probably were busy making their own brand new units. And you also had the problem that in 3046, well, the Dragon didn't have double heatsink technology. That was basically restricted to the Federated Commonwealth. There was no massive endosteel mills yet. So if you wanted to have a basic Jenner, you were going to go with a basic Jenner with maybe some minor upgrades. Basic upgrades they were, but they still made the Jenner far more survivable than it was before. This new production model, the JR7K, used 3.5 tons of ferrofibrous armor. That's basically comparable to that 4 tons of armor you had before, but with that half ton you save, you actually put a case around the SRM4 ammo bin, so if it blows, you don't lose the entire mech. That's about all you really change on it. It's a Jenner, it's tougher even though it has a little bit less armor, and it does what Jenners are supposed to do. There was a version in 3050 where Kurita took out one of the medium lasers and replaced it with a C3 computer. That's always a thing that they were doing back then. C3 computers are fun because you can share telemetry with your other units in your lance and company. So if you're the closest to the enemy, well, they're going to use your targeting data to track the enemy. It's really a workable technology that the Blakist made better than whatever Kurita was doing. Once again, though, a lot of those Jenners, when they came into our stores and places like that, well, we stripped that SRM off, put more armor on, because that's what people wanted those Jenners to be, a fast, tough raider. In the end, though, we'll talk about the actual Merc upgrade. Something that happened in the mid-3050s with those new Jenner Ks running around. Merc outfit grabbed them for all different reasons, especially when they were allowed back into Combine after, rescuing the coordinator on Lucian. But a lot of people wanted those Jenners to actually be a little bit better, which led to the JR7KK. Heatsink kit is replaced with double heatsinks, first and foremost, so the mech actually doesn't overheat anymore. Then you probably have to do a lot of hard work because you have to rebuild the entire skeleton out of endo steel. After a while, a lot of places, a lot of major refit yards had kits ready to go for when Jenners came in. You put 2 extra jump jets in the leg assemblies, so you get the full range of jump on there. And you add an extra half ton of ferrofibrous armor, so you get that SRM4, more armor than on the original 7K. You don't overeat, unless you jump and shoot everything, but if you do that, you're a bit silly. So this was what mercs were actually running a lot of times if they were not just stripping off that SRM and putting more armor on. And then you don't have variants of the Jenner for a big long while because they introduced the Owens, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which basically replaced the Jenner in most formations. During the Jihad, though, due to some nuclear accidents once again, you add brand new Jenners that were needed to be produced. The first one was the JR7C3, which is a semi-field upgrade, semi-production unit. It's a mix of all sorts of things. You go back to the regular fire Jenner setup with the medium lasers being replaced by ER medium lasers. Gonna run fairly odd, but they're nice enough to give you 11 double heat sinks, and the targeting computer is slave to a C3 computer. Once again, a pretty decent upgrade if you're going to be hunting people with a team of people with C3s, and you get 1.5 tons more of ferrofibrous armor out of the deal. This is a pretty decent machine, in my opinion, and I can see why people wanted to get that upgrade kit. But if there's a C3, where's the C1 and the C2? Well, if you dig around, the C2 is a radical departure from the original Jenner, using a trio of MML5s, 1 in each arm and 1 in the torso, with 3 tons of ammo. This one is meant to be used in a variety of roles, either as a brawler, a support unit, or even a mine layer, if you want it to be. You also get an extra jump jet, so you can jump 180 meters. I guess it's an upgrade. But in order to do that, well, you have an XL engine, you have an XL gyro. The pilot is squeezed into a small cockpit with that C3 computer basically between his legs, so it's a bit more risky to pilot. You do get 5.5 tons of heavy ferrofibrous armor, which makes it one of the better defended Jenners until the armor is breached. Not the same family as all the other Jenners we've been talking about, basically. The final Jihad model was the JR7C4, which was meant to fight units with ECMs. ECMs break up C3 networks, so the way Kurita dealt with it was by building what they called the C3 boost slave, which is able to get through that ECM interference. It's basically that C2 we were just talking about here, but with only 2 MML launchers instead of 3. The gyro is back to the normal one rather than an XL one. Your jump range is back to that 150 meter, and the small cockpit sits on top of that C3 boosted slave. So the pilot needs to be careful or damage the computer and get his commanding officer really mad at him. There is a brand new Jenner from Lucian Armor Work Abidadi, which is the JR7N. For this one, they went with an XL engine and put the extra 2 jump jet to give it the full 210 meter jump experience. You get a targeting computer linked to a Beagle active probe instead of the C3 this time around, so it's more useful in more situations unless you have a whole lance running C3 equipment. I'm pretty sure you can strip it off and replace it with a C3 in a matter of a few hours, maybe a day or so. I'd have to play with one directly and try to do that. The weaponry is also back to standard with 2 ER medium lasers in each arm and a 4-tube SRM with 1 ton of ammo in a Case 2 protected bin. Pretty decent, and you will see some of them running ER medium lasers that are clan graded, just because that's how Clan Nova Cat ended, basically. And if you look at the body itself, it's protected by heavy ferrofibrous armor, and you've got 11 double heat sinks to keep you fairly cool. This is a very decent Jenner. It does what Jenners are supposed to do, and it also works very well as a scout. This is probably a thing that's going to be sold in rather large amounts and produced in even larger amounts for the DCMS and their friends. We were talking about it earlier, but now here it is, the OW1 Owens, named after another Terran Olympian. The Jenner was one of those mechs that was decided to be omnified when the Inner Sphere figured out how pod technology works and how to have the computer balance the gyro or whatever weapons you put in those pods, along with things like the Firestarter and the Blackjack. It was a simple Omni-Mech, but it was going to replace the Jenner completely if it had been in constant production. But unfortunately, LAW's Omni-Mech facilities were destroyed at the start of the Jihad, as we spoke earlier. The Owens can't jump, but it is faster overall than your regular Jenner, and it hard-mounts a Tag, a C3 Slave, and a Beagle Probe. I understand why those are hard-mounted on the design because of how the Inner Sphere didn't quite understand how pods worked in many cases, but it still gives you 7 tons of pod space to play with, which is decent enough depending on what you want to put on there. You can make this another Jenner if you want, basically. I truly enjoyed the Owens and working on it. It's one of those better Inner Sphere Omni-Mechs, I believe. But once again, the regular Jenner being so cheap makes the Owen far more expensive in comparison. We're going to have a full discussion on that machine at a later date. The Jenner is also one of the rare mechs that was actually brought to the clans by the Wolf Dragoon, where a bunch of them looked at them and were like, yeah, we actually want those. During their recon mission, the Wolf Dragoon did capture quite a few mechs, and this included a bunch of Jenners from House Kurita. When they brought them back, a bunch of Nova Cat people in a drunk-induced dream decided, yeah, we want those, and we want those clan graded. The resulting machine was the Jenner 2C, which will get its own video someday, and it's another 35-ton light mech, but this one has a top speed of 151 kilometers per hour, which is rather quick. The base design is fitted with 7 jump jets, so you get that 210-meter jump range. And for weapons, you have a pair of SRM-6 and a Streak SRM-4, which makes this one of the ideal anti-vehicle mechs, in my opinion. It does a pretty good job, it's really fragile, and it's common enough that you're still going to see some of those running around the Inner Sphere. Even with the various stoppages in production, the Jenner was never really at risk of being extinct, just because so many were built that even the AFFS, which didn't build any, had quite a few of them that were salvaged and were repaired using locally produced spare parts. Yes, the Owens would probably have replaced it completely at some point, if not for the Black Dragon Society and the Blakists, but even there, the base design Jenner would have been around forever, basically, just because of how tough battle mechs end up being. While it's not the most common mech around here in the Rimward periphery, the more you go towards the core, the more you're going to see them, and maybe one day Lucian Armor Work will build a factory somewhere on Torian space or in Frank space to build some of those there in a maybe more secure location, strangely enough. So I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. I thank you for listening to me for so long, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.